Hi there. For today's video, I prepared a list with the most interesting and most commonly asked questions at TikTok in 2023. And this will be actually a follow-up to the video I made a number of years ago, which was pretty well received, with a few updates and even more questions and more pointers on how to answer these questions. And for this, I actually prepared a small cheat sheet, 2 pages, with the questions and with the notes I'd like to talk about next. First question, most commonly asked in interviews at TikTok, would be the self-introduction, to tell me about yourself or your CV, or why do you want this job, or why TikTok, or where do you see yourself in 5 years, if you want, or how do you see yourself fitting in at TikTok? Okay, so notice even if these questions are not exactly precisely the same, why TikTok may not be answered as tell me about yourself, but still I highly encourage you to prepare them at once because they are general types of questions, which are usually introductory types of questions, which you could prepare together because they contain essentially the same elements. Okay, what's new in answering these types of questions is that, I experience using ChatGPT for pointers to give the best answers actually works pretty well. Okay, again, with introductory types of questions, I highly encourage you to use it. Okay, now when compared to what's the value, how much time should you prepare, how much time you should allocate to prepare such questions, I'd say not that much as they used to, as some people used to, simply because I believe that nowadays the behavioral part of the interview as a whole replaces the role of that impression you used to create with your elevator pitch. So actually, in my opinion, preparing for the behavioral part of the interview is far more important than actually preparing your elevator pitch. Okay. Nevertheless, since it's the most commonly asked question, I believe it's a great opportunity for you to sell yourself, and maybe you want to add a few links to their in your pitch, to add a few links to their values, their mission. If I'd have to give you some hints here, but overall, I don't see that your elevator pitch to be a significant factor to passing a proper job interview with a FANG company these days. Okay, next, describe a time when you had to deal with a difficult situation and how did you handle it. Tell us a time when you have struggled on a campaign or with a product launch or with your subject matter expertise. Or what is a tough challenge you recently resolved? Okay, so this is the second most commonly asked question. At TikTok, actually the number one most commonly asked behavioral question in TikTok interviews. So since it's the most, the first one I'm talking about here, I should also emphasize here that behavioral questions require you to answer them in STAR format. Okay, situation, task, action, and result. Reason for this is so important is not only because it's a pretty good format to communicate your answers to behavioral questions, but more importantly because the interviewer expects you to answer questions this way. If you don't answer questions during the STAR format, you will be perceived as someone who most likely did not prepare for the interview. Okay, and of course, if you're applying for a director level roles, you could, also use other formats to maybe dramatize a little bit more, such as the DIGS format, but that's super complex stuff that I won't get into the theory of behavioral interviews here. Okay, but STAR format is essential. Okay, avoid any other types of distractions, other types of formats, the SOAR, the SAR, the whatever. STAR format is enough. It works perfectly fine. Had great success with this. And by the way, it's highly recommended by many of FANG companies as well. Now, with respect to difficult situations, how do you answer questions around difficult situations? Well, what's a difficult situation you've been through? Okay, what's something that you really want them to know about you during this job interview? In my experience, this is pretty straightforward to find out for pretty much any role. But where I see the failure with these types of questions is not in the initial answer themselves, but in the follow-ups, in the details. Okay, so you would talk about the conflict you had, but if the conflict was 10 years ago, chances are you won't remember much about it. Okay, So if they ask you, I don't know, for some metric or something, chances are you will not remember it. So this is called a deep dive test. Okay, so the deep dive test means they ask you a number of follow-up questions to really dive deep to see on whether you are actually the owner of the project. Did you actually work on that project yourself? And there's another reason why they ask you so many questions, because if you cannot remember these, you might also be perceived as someone who might not have prepared for the interview enough. Okay, because that long story short, the way I recommend you prepare such questions, such answers to behavioral questions, would be through stories. Okay, so specifically for this one, a difficult situation, you could spend 1 or 2 hours to make a brain dump of 2 pages or even 5 pages if you want, to really write down all the details of this difficult situation, of this challenge you want them to really know about. And if you do so, and then you start to only take the interesting bits of information and structure it in a star format, you realize that actually your answer will sound so much better, will be also containing the interesting information, the interesting metrics or key performance indicators, and you'll be able to perform successfully on the deep dive test as well. Okay, and by the way, these questions are also linked in the video description right next to that like button. Next question. How would your colleagues or your manager describe you in 3 words? Or what is your specialty and core ability? Or what is your strength and weakness? Or what are your top 3 strengths and weaknesses? Okay. Now notice here how the first question differs quite a lot from the last one. How would your colleagues or your manager describe you in 3 words versus what are your top 3 strengths? Okay, which is essentially asking you the same thing. Okay. So notice how understanding why they ask you a question in the first place can play a significant difference during an interview. Now, with respect to strengths and weaknesses, yes, a pretty common interview question. Everyone prepares for this. Some interesting pointers here for you is that your strength is something that you must prepare beyond just for the purpose of answering this question in your job interview, because in a job interview, the best candidates are the ones who play on their strength. Okay, so do you know what's that 1 to 3 strengths that really should set you apart from other candidates during the interview? And from experience, not many of you know these things. Okay, so it might take a little bit of time, especially if you're not familiar with these things. But if you really try to focus and find your strengths, or your strengths from your best stories, for instance, that will make your life easier, and you improve your performance during the interview. Now, with respect to weaknesses, there's a trend actually nowadays that asks you for 3 weaknesses, simply because if they would ask you only for 1 weakness, everyone would use public speaking. So, that's why you should prepare 3 of them. And by the way, don't use dumb weaknesses such as I'm not good at job interviews. Okay, you should really find something that makes sense for your role. Usually technical roles would use sales, and sales would use technical stuff. And this would be one way to think about this, but there's plenty of examples, and I believe it shouldn't be too complex to find the best approach here. Next one, share a real life situation of when you encountered a conflict with a colleague while working on a project together. What was the outcome? Or simply, how do you deal with conflict? Or tell me about the time when you resolved a conflict. Okay, so why would they ask you such a question in a job interview? Because they want to see your interpersonal skills. Okay, so in my experience, is not a complex interview question, and of course, the idea is to think about the real life example of when this conflict actually happened. And please don't tell me you don't have any conflict because you're just a recent graduate, because even as a recent graduate, you did have conflict in a working environment. Okay, if you think about it. Okay, so examples, for more junior roles will be pretty classic, unsurprising, but for more senior roles, you must really find something more peculiar, I don't know, if someone was blocking your plan for approval, or blocking some sort of initiative of yours, basically a conflict with that person, you must, find a way to diffuse the situation, to, I don't know, to regain their trust and to move on. Okay, a huge mistake here for conflict with colleagues and conflict for answering conflicts in interpersonal context would be to use ChatGPT and simply to clone examples from there. They're just boring, uninteresting, and believe me, it doesn't It doesn't work. I sell training programs, actually. So I'm also a coach, so this is not a strategy I would encourage you, and I wouldn't encourage you using ChatGPT for behavioral questions in general. Okay, next one. By the way, we'll also talk about interpersonal a bit later on in the video, because there's other questions as well. Next one. How do you resonate with TikTok's or ByteDance core values? Or what's your favorite value? Or what do you know about the company's values? Okay, so this question is pretty high on the most important, most commonly asked questions, especially these days. And they actually call these values their byte styles, and can be seen on ByteDance's website. My recommendation here would be to be straightforward with this. I mean, go on the website, read the values, understand, see which one you connect the best with, eventually take some notes, and then move on. Because again, it's a general type of question, pretty generic answers. You don't have a good reason to spend too much time on this one as well. Okay, eventually you could couple it with the general, your elevator pitch as well. Okay, because usually you would want, some of you will prefer to use in why TikTok. Once is because your expertise, and second because you connect well with ByteDance's byte styles. Okay, but usually a straightforward one. Next question: what is one project that you are most proud of? Okay, or tell me a project that you have led recently. What's the best campaign or product launch you've worked on, and why? Or simply tell me about your most impactful project. Okay, so notice here how the first question, project that you're most proud of, versus tell me about your most impactful project, are basically asking you exactly for the same thing. What's your best story that you prepare for the job interview? Do you have a best story going into a job interview? Or do you have at least 3 best stories that you're able to talk for, I don't know, half an hour during the interview? Do you really have something you want them to know about that will make a differentiator during the job interview? From experience, it's not always the case. Okay, people don't tend to prepare their best stories with as much importance as they should, versus just answering questions. So that's my main point here. And also I noticed a trend in TikTok interviews that they usually didn't used to ask you for what's your best story as a question, as the most asked question during their interviews, but they do now. And I suspect one of the reasons, because it's a very revealing question. I actually call these gifts during the job interview, simply because if you prepared for the interview, then it's your ability to shine during this very formal experience, by the way. So showing them that you prepared for them, it's actually a big one. Okay, so that's why preparing your best story is something I highly recommend, and you can see scores pretty high on the most asked questions as well. Next question: how do you manage stress? Can you work under pressure, or how do you deal with high pressure situations? Okay, so stress these days is a pretty common topic. If I'd have to answer this, how do I manage stress, or how do I prove that I'm able to manage stress? Well, I failed a couple of startups, and I believe this should be self-explanatory. Stress philosophy: well, if I'm stressed out, I'm really stressed out, then I strongly believe it's better to just take a break and come back stronger, instead of just stressing everyone else around me. Okay, but maybe another way to answer this for dealing with stressful situation, such as an interview. A job interview can be a stressful situation, or just simply consistently uploading videos on YouTube. In my opinion, it all boils down to preparation. Okay, so if you are prepared for the job interview, if you are going in prepared, the stress actually will act as a stimulant, will act to your favor during the interview. Okay, so long you prepare them. So preparation plays an important role in dealing with stress in job interviews, in my opinion, and many other processes, okay, through life. But this is how I'd go about answering how do I manage stress in general. Next one: tell me about the time when you had to deal with competing priorities. Now, competing priorities could be anything from deadlines, features, campaigns, customer requests. Okay, or another variation of this: would you feel comfortable working on different projects or assignments at the same time? Or simply, how do you prioritize? Okay, it could be as simple as that. These questions around prioritization, I believe it's self-explanatory. It's obvious that examples will wildly differ by role. And again, I advise you against using ChatGPT because they can give some pretty convincing answers. But the main thing here with prioritizations is to really dive deep and find something from your own experience of ideally, I don't know, some gut-wrenching prioritization with actual impact. When you had some serious events in your work and had to reprioritize everything else, and there was some impact. And another interesting one I've heard over time is when people reprioritize, the important stuff versus the non-important stuff, but they didn't delay the non-important stuff because they stay longer hours to compensate for that. If working hard is something you want to sell yourself on during the job interview. Okay. If I'd have to give you an interesting pointer here of what are all the best answers I've heard have in common, they use frameworks, prioritization frameworks, to make them more credible. Okay, because if you say, hey, I did this because this was more important and I didn't do that because this was less important, that's fine, as an explanation. But if you link it, hey, I use this prioritization framework because this, I believe would obtain the best results, and I used it also a number of times before, yes, it would make you considerably more credible. Now, finding the framework, the prioritization framework, that's different for, I don't know, customer service or developers or directors or managers. Okay, but finding frameworks sells well, as with the STAR format as well. Yeah. Next, tell me about the time when you failed and what you learned from it, or describe a time when you made a bad decision. Okay, so these are the failure stories. They actually used to ask these questions quite a lot previously, but they are no longer that commonly asked now. What's interesting about failure story is that if you didn't prepare for the interview, it will show, and very few people are able to talk about a failure story from the number one try. Okay, it usually take at least three attempts to find something that will work well. And the other thing is that on the failure story, they would ask you this because they want to see if you had any learnings from that failure. Okay, for more executive types of roles, they would also ask you for failures because many people simply won't talk about actual failures with actual impact. Okay, for more junior roles, yeah, you could say that it didn't have much impact. It wasn't the end of the world, but still, for more senior roles, you must look for impact for that failure. But it's a pretty common interview question still, so I'd highly encourage you to try it out. Try it if it's going to take you 3 attempts to find the proper failure story. At least that's my experience. Next one, do you have experience working in teams, or describe a time when you had to work as a team, or how do you work in teams? Could be as simple as that. Now, one of the reasons why they ask you about working in teams more and more these days is because there's this remote work trend, which has less and less people being experienced with working in actual teams. Okay, but to simplify this question, how do you work in teams? Tell me about the time when you worked in team, or think of a time when you supported a team member. Okay, or a time when you led a team through a difficult time if you are in a leadership role, okay? Or, for example, when your teammates were disengaged, what did you do? Okay, this would be examples showcases someone as a team player, okay? Someone who knows to work in teams, okay? Or basically, here you must think about how of the time when you added value to your team. Could be as simple as that. If we take it a bit more general. Another example, when a teammate called in sick and maybe you covered for him for a number of days, or maybe for managerial types of roles, you spotted a better way to allocate resources on a specific team. You can imagine that the quality of the examples and the type of examples will vary by the type of the role you're applying for. For instance, for a manager level role, this working in teams will be subject matter expertise. As you know, as a developer is supposed to code well, a manager is supposed to manage well. Okay, so that's why there is examples for manager level. I won't get into details because it's subject matter expertise, not a behavioral question anymore. Okay, something you might not be aware of. But all in all, yes, find a specific example for most roles when you played a good role in a team and you added value to that team. That's the key here. That's answering this question. Next one, how do you handle work in a fast-paced environment? Or tell me about the time when you worked in a fast-paced environment. Okay, so I do assume that TikTok is a fast-paced environment, but how do you adapt to fast-moving work environments here? And as you would expect here, being able to move in a fast-paced environment is a combination of various factors, such as understanding your role or interpersonal skills, with your colleagues, ambition, and of course, stress management. Okay, so what could be a great story here? Well, actually, we covered each of these pointers in our previous sections. Okay, interpersonal skills, stress. Okay, so again, using stories to highlight on these core behaviors is an efficient approach to answer such a question. Okay, so the idea is to understand why they ask you a question, what makes someone who works great in a fast-paced environment, to really split it into pieces, and then those pieces, the pieces, the interpersonal skills with your colleagues, the ambition, stress management, those, for these you already have some great stories to talk about. Okay, this would be, by the way, an open-ended question. How do you work in a fast-paced environment? Okay, open-ended questions, it means you think of specific scenarios where you worked in such fast-paced environment. Think of highlighting something interesting for them, an interesting behavior for them there. Could be interpersonal, could be stress, could be something else. Next one, tell me about the time when you had a disagreement with your manager. Okay, or tell me about the time when your manager stakeholder was imposing their way of doing something that you didn't agree with. How did you handle that situation? Okay, I call this the backbone test. Okay, so the idea is that companies nowadays are no longer, especially high-performing companies, are no longer looking for yes people. Okay, so they are, someone might agree during an interview with the interviewer just for the sake of social cohesion. Yes, you're the interviewer, you're always the boss, you're always right. Okay, what makes a great example here of showing backbone? It actually, a time when you disagreed with someone respectfully without showing arrogance. Okay, so for example, when you are sure that 100% that your boss was wrong on something and you have the data to show it, to prove it. Okay, that would be backbone, a classic example of backbone. Actually, this question used to be asked quite often, more often than in 2023. But the backbone test together with the deep dive test are classic screening techniques in job interviews with high-performing company. Next, tell me about the time when you had to make a difficult decision. What was the decision about and what was the outcome? What were there any learnings from that experience? Okay, so decision making. Okay, decision making. Basically, they're asking you, tell me about the time when you had to make an important decision. And if you remember, we also talked about questions around prioritization here. And there I said the key was, to of course think of a time when you prioritized in order to decide, because that story could also fit in here as well. But more interestingly, to link it with a framework. Okay, and a simple framework in decision making would be type 1 and type 2 decisions. Type 1 decisions meaning that they don't need much time to think of because they can be reversed, and type 2 decisions are the more important ones which cannot be reversed, and therefore they require adequate investigations. A type 1 and a reversible decision could be, estimating a timeline for an ambiguous project. It's not essential you get it right from the first try, or maybe it is, but in this context, I'm saying it's not always imperative that you spend a ton of time on that. It might not be worth the investment. Okay, and a type 2 decision is the one that's worth investing some time, and it would be, I like giving this example of a wisdom tooth extraction. Okay, it's not a reversible decision, so you must really either you take it out or not. So that's why it should be well thought. Okay, but again, decision-making, prioritization are in the same category of questions, and many other, as you'll see, if you try to correlate questions from the most commonly asked list, many of the stories you would use in one would also fit in plenty of others. Okay, of course, challenge remains that you have enough stories. Next one, tell us about the time when you had different opinions with your coworker. How did you handle that situation? Okay, so again, this is about interpersonal skills. Time when you disagreed with a colleague. Yeah, essentially it's the same thing. So you showcase this through communication, essentially your ability to earn their trust. Okay, it's exactly the same approach. The reason why I said this question actually is pretty asked as well is because, but also there's a monumental mistake that people do here when they want to show the other person that they're right and the other person is wrong. This does not happen in group meetings. Okay, so for instance, I had people who said that they called on a group meeting where they made him feel guilty in front of everyone else. So believe it or not, yes, this does happen in job interviews. So these are actual answers from actual candidates, and of course, this would be a terrible mistake to do. But all in all, it's about interpersonal skills. So the moment you prepare stories around interpersonal skills, you'll be easily able to answer these questions. A time when you had a different opinion with your coworker. Okay, a time when you disagreed with someone. Okay, even with your coworker is also a manager. Could be also your manager, by the way. Could also be the backbone test as well, if you want a story from there. Next one, tell me about the time when you use data to influence an outcome. Okay. Data to influence an outcome is basically linked to decision making. Okay, so data-driven decision making. Okay, primarily asked, of course, for technical roles, but also why not a sales role for a KPI, for interesting KPI as well. But as you can see here, again, the data to influence an outcome is related to decision making and even for a prioritization. Okay, so notice how 3 questions could fit into the same story, so long you prepare the proper story. Okay, that's my key takeaway here. Which social media platform do you use the most and why? Okay, this is a commonly asked question in interview with TikTok. And in my opinion, this could give some interesting perspective into someone's literacy around social networks in general. Like for instance, I don't use Instagram or Twitter at all, but I still do use Facebook because of as it with family and some older friends. Also, another, I believe, a dangerous approach would be to say that ditching a social media network just because you absolutely detest it might not be the best approach to sell yourself in a job interview either. So I would see some of you making these mistakes as well. Okay, and last one I want to talk about here, describe a time when you improve the process. Can you quantify its improvement in percent or numbers? What was the outcome and why was that important? Okay, so a time when you improve the process. Why would someone ask you for such a question in a job interview? Because they want to screen your quality standards. And of course, this would happen for people who work with processes, for people who are supposed to handle complex processes and to really improve them. As with the deep dive tests, these questions are nothing complex to talk about if you prepare them in advance, but the challenge is, of course, to know that these questions get asked in job interviews. So preparing the questions and preparing also for the most commonly follow-up questions for this makes the most appropriate answer in a job interview. And by the way, if you some interviewers will agree for you to talk about for 15 minutes straight on this story as well. So hopefully you found this information useful, and thank you for watching.